CKNW.
We're going to get him. I'll give you an update here on the Bill Cosby trial. Now, this is Mike Smith in for Simi Sarah today. We got the jury still out, of course. This has been amazing how this is the fifth day of deliberations on the deadlock jury in Bill Cosby's trial. Interesting that the jury came back and asked the court a very loaded question. The question was, what is reasonable doubt? This is what the question that the jury has asked. And they've also asked to rehear Cosby's evidence about acquiring Quaaludes. It's the third time that parts of Bill Cosby's statement on that were reread to the jury during their deliberations. This has been going on for over 40 hours now of deliberations, and the jury's questions leave open the possibility that they may have remained deadlocked and unable to reach a unanimous decision. And this could go on, and we continue to watch this with keen interest. 3 charges against Bill Cosby include assaulting Andrea Constand without her consent, assaulting her when she was unconscious, and using drugs to substantially impair her ability to consent. If found guilty, he could face up to 10 years in prison on each charge. There's a 12-person jury that has heard the case. They have been sequestered in a local hotel room near Pittsburgh, where they continue to be bussed back and forth to the courthouse. So we continue to follow and wait for any updates on the Bill Cosby trial. And if we get a decision, of course, you will hear about it immediately. Many questions that remain here is what could happen if the jury remains deadlocked. There could be a declaration of a mistrial. In cases like that, you could potentially have another trial, or the prosecutors could decide to cut their losses, and that would be the end of it. There's also some discretion for the jury to come back with a variety of different types of verdicts. They could come back with guilty on all counts, not guilty on all counts, so they could have a mixed verdict where they find guilt on some of the charges but not guilty on others. They can also return a partial verdict in which they come to a unanimous verdict on some of the counts, yet they remain deadlocked on others. Let's check in now with Quentin Brogdon. He is a legal expert and a former prosecutor. He's been following the case closely. Very pleased he could come on the show. Hi.
Good morning, Mike. How are you? Or good afternoon, I should say.
Thank you very kindly for coming on. Why has this case been so difficult, do you think, for this jury?
I think it's the burden of proof. They seem to be hanging on that. They ask for the definition of beyond a reasonable doubt. They may well believe that it probably occurred as the accuser says, but the burden in this criminal case is beyond a reasonable doubt. They've asked for portions of the testimony and the deposition of Cosby to be read back. And they had, the strategy of Cosby's attorneys was to put the accuser on trial, to point out inconsistencies in her testimony about, the date of the assault, whether she was alone with him before and after the assault. And, she waited a year to report it, which is not that unusual, but they've made an issue of that. And then there were 72 phone calls between the two of them after the alleged assault. She claimed she was just answering questions and addressing, he's a trustee or was at Temple University. She was the director of operations for the university's women's basketball team.
Okay, it's interesting that
credibility.
Right. It's interesting that the judge has encouraged the jury, look, go back, keep trying. How many times can he send the jury back in there into that jury room and say, keep trying? Can he ask them to keep going for as long as he wants, or is there at some point do they just say that's it, they can't reach a decision?
There's no specific technical limit. Cosby's attorneys have filed a motion for mistrial, and among other things, they're alleging that the judge is in essence forcing this jury, at least maybe not directly, but by implication and by continuing to force them to deliberate. That's what they're arguing, to convict him in a circumstance when they otherwise might not. But the judge has given them a charge, what some lawyers call a dynamite charge, to basically not jettison their firmly held beliefs, but to try to reach a consensus. They have to be unanimous if they can. If they cannot, then he declares at some point within his discretion that it's a hung jury, and then there's a mistrial. And then it can be retried again, provided no prosecutorial misconduct led to that mistrial. And it does not appear there was any prosecutorial misconduct of that kind. So then the prosecutor gets to decide whether to try him again if indeed it becomes a hung jury and a mistrial.
Is there a chance the prosecutor at that point could, well, say, okay, let's start over, we'll have another trial, or could the prosecutors just cut their losses and say, no, that's it, we're just gonna let it go, and Cosby would walk?
The prosecutor in this case ran on a platform of prosecuting Crosby. The previous prosecutor had started an investigation and then somewhat abruptly discontinued it about 10 years earlier. But this prosecutor ran on a platform of prosecuting Cosby, so the odds that he would continue a prosecution or prosecute him again in a second trial are higher than they otherwise might be. But it will depend upon the intelligence that they get back from the jurors. They will try to determine whether, for example, there were 11 jurors who were in favor of prosecuting and one juror who was a holdout. If that's the case, then the odds of it being prosecuted again are higher than otherwise. Conversely, if there were 11 who favored acquittal and one who wanted to prosecute, then the odds of going forward again are not as high. The prosecutor wants to win, doesn't need a lock-set guarantee, but if it looks hopeless, and then they try and learn from mistakes. Both sides will gain intelligence from this trial if it's tried again, and perhaps alter strategies in response to what happened in this trial and what the testimony was.
Very interesting, Quentin. I mean, you're a guy who's a former prosecutor yourself and an expert who's watched a lot of these kind of trials. When you watch this one, what do you think is going on in that jury room in terms of the relations between the jurors? I mean, when you have a jury that's sequestered like this for such a long period of time over several days, I don't know, do people start to get on each other's nerves in there?
Yeah, there's been kind of a cottage industry of trying to read the tea leaves as to, looks on the jurors' faces, who might be upset and frustrated with who else on the panel. And you can't really tell. You can see trials, and I've seen trials where jurors are frowning and looking at one lawyer as though they're not buying anything that lawyer says, and at the end of the trial they go in favor of that lawyer's argument. So I've given up really on trying to read that. We know by some of their questions that they appear to be very conscientious.
Okay.
They appear to be focusing upon consent and whether there was consent.
Right. Thanks for your expertise. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Michael. Appreciate being on.
Quentin Brogdon, he's a legal expert and former prosecutor on the Bill Cosby trial.